All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. You're wonderful. I'm going to talk about calm technology. I'll give you a little bit of history. I gave a small talk on cyborg anthropology the last session, so I won't go over that again. I'm sorry. But I was writing my thesis in 2007 on mobile phones, and I was trying to get the change in culture that people would experience between the kind of T9 type phone with the hardware keys, and then once the screen got flattened and you could load any software on it, how behavior would change. And it changed dramatically. People were hurrying into their phones, scrying pool, and they were falling asleep next to them and waking up next to them and looking at them before they looked at their romantic partner in the morning, and they were crying and picking them up and soothing back to sleep, and then they lasted only a couple years. And this whole thing really changed. People would be walking their dog and put their dog on pause so that they could type a message. And along the way, I found out that there was this idea of calm technology, and that one of the co-founders of it had died and didn't get to see the future that he predicted. He was the father of ubiquitous computing, which we kind of now know as Internet of Things. So he predicted something that took a longer time to happen, and so I want to bring back some of that information and then bring back an era of time where we had a really solid perspective, I think, on computers, and so that we can all kind of get realigned outside of the different future that we have. Is there? Oh, yeah.
We're trying not to distract you.
Great. This is fun. This is what I'm talking about. I guess the blue screen of death is not calm. But the color blue has always been considered a safe color and associated with technology. So a lot of banks use the blue color so that you can trust them, especially if they no longer have the aesthetics of a bank with the marble columns, so they have to transfer that safety into a color. So we get blue. But the blue screen of death is the opposite, even though that's not the blue screen of death. That looks good. You know, it's funny, I upgraded computers, and things are not as good as they were. Hey, look! Dun-dun, dun-dun.
Or was.
Almost.
This is great. I'm having a good time. Well, I'm going to start giving you the talk, and then this will emerge, and it'll be good. Okay. So in a lot of conferences, we think that the more technology we add, the better things we'll get. How many of you have more calm in your life with the additional technology that you have? Okay. Right. And we were also told that the more tech we would have, the more free time we would have, that it was supposed to help us get more free. That technology, like a gas, tends to expand to fill every space it has available, and that our moments become these spaces where they're filled with technology instead of being human. Yeah, we can do one. Here we go. This way.
Oh, it's coming slowly, maybe.
Sweet. A lot of tech conferences I go to say there's going to be 50 billion devices by 2020. And regardless of the actual number, I like to ask whether that's a good idea. I like to see what works with, cool, this is great. Well, I'll just give the talk from scratch. And we don't need slides. Off the projector.
That sounds great.
Yeah, that'll be good. Nope. Yep.
Let's just listen.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, this is calm.
the perfect talk for it.
It is. It is.
And if one of your phones goes off during the talk where I talk about alerts on your phone, it's going to be even better. So turn all of your phones on.
Yep.
Okay, so we have smartwatches, which replicate what's already on your phone. And sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's not. Because when you open your phone, when you see that something has happened, you might just dive into an email thread or get really amped up when you're on a vacation in Hawaii instead of vacationing. How many of you have notifications that are always useful? If you look at your phone, always, you are a person that everybody should talk to. So if you look at your phones right now, a lot of the notifications are probably from robots. And probably not even from people. So if you spend 5 minutes today, go into settings and turn off all unnecessary notifications. And if you can, keep your phone in airplane mode sometimes. Just decide, or under a cast iron pan, so that it's hard to look up. So sometimes the smartwatch is helpful, like especially for exercise and things. But when we try to put chips into everything, we get things like a smart fridge. A lot of clients have tried to get me to build a smart fridge for them. And I say, what do you want in the smart fridge? And they say, well, we want a thumbprint reader so that you can lock people out of your fridge. They're unauthorized using your fridge. I'm like, if you can't trust your family members, you've got a much larger problem. Also, if you're making a cake and your hands are full of flour, why would you want a thumbprint reader? You don't have to wash your hands. You're going to just leave the door ajar and get rid of all the energy savings that you originally were going to have by having a smart fridge. And then finally, they're like, we want to have a diabetic plan so that like there's this thing or a restricted eating plan, and so that it locks you out if you've eaten too many sweets. And like, I don't know about you, but I store my sweets in a dumb cupboard to the side, not a refrigerator. And then the last one that really annoys me is they said, look, we want to have a fridge that tells you when the bananas have gone bad. I said the bananas have a peel and they tell you when they've gone bad. But when you put it all together, you get the dystopian continuing future in which everything's written in a different programming language. Everything has a different update cycle. Every single thing is a vector for some sort of cyber attack. The whole thing takes more bandwidth than you streaming Game of Thrones on Netflix, and you have to become an effective system administrator to live in your own home. I don't know about you, but I want to go home and be home and not have to be a system administrator.
Yes.
Unless you want to be one. You should have
Lots of system administration.
Yeah, you should be able to build a smart home of your dreams if you want. I grew up in 2 smart homes, and voice-activated stuff does not work. One of the original smart home type things was just one of those feeders for your animals, and it would go on a certain time scale, right? So like every few hours, it would give some kibble. Sometimes it gets stuck, so you'd have a backup feeder. So for $60, you could just have a really nice fail-proof thing. So PetNet.io decides to disrupt the pet feeding industry as if it's a really big industry. $30 junk. And then what they do is they made it connected to the web. And a remote server can manage the feeding schedule for your animals and allow you to Skype your animals. So you could feel less bad about having your advertising agency job and making your home weird, your dog home alone all the time. So what happened is that the server failed and nobody knew whether their cats were alive or dead. People were freaking out. They were tweeting at PetNet and saying, is my dog or cat alive? When are you going to push an update? What happened to the server? What's going on? I screenshot a bunch of these panic things. And the engineers said, oh, sorry, offline support was in our next update. I was like, did you have to raise $500K of venture capital to put in an offline feeding update to ensure that pets survived your basic technology and your promise of never having to worry about your pets ever again? And they were mad at me, and they were So I was like, man, I'm going to call the EFF on these. No, don't do that. But I looked at the terms of service, and it said, you agree not to hold PetNet responsible for the well-being of your pet. You agree to not rely on the services for any critical things according to your pet. And you agree not to hold it. It's just like, yeah, this big capital letters. You agree, do not rely on the services for any safety or critical purposes related to it. It's just this big text that no one's going to read. So they have no liability. Yet on the front of the box or website, they tell you you don't have to worry about this anymore. So what happened? Because the last generation of pet feeding technology just worked on an electrical outlet and a timer. We have sprinkler systems that work like this. It's already been solved. Why do we have to re-solve it again, add more technology, make it shinier, complicate the supply chain, have it Bluetooth into something stupid, and then tell you that it makes your life easier? Who knows about these Greek concepts of time? So there's this concept of chronos time, which is the kind of industrial time. From 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. you have a meeting, you can only do certain things during this meeting, then you finally get to the idea that you wanted to and the meeting's over. And then it's a Friday, so you can't do anything anymore because then Monday's coming around and there's an emergency and you can't implement anything. And the checklist goes away. Chronos time is really useful for airlines. You need to make sure things happen on time. You need to make sure an assembly line happens on time. This is this repetitive time. It's really good for ensuring things happen the same way. But if you're going to go on a retreat like this to understand what you need to do in your organization and come up with some really amazing thing in this kind of unstructured time, that's this Kairos time. It's the time of like falling in love and watching a sunset and watching your kid take its first steps. It's the time of being on a train and realizing that the thing that you were doing was stupid and you need to change careers. Or it's the time of Archimedes jumping up and down and being like, I took a bath and I understood density. So if we're getting constantly interrupted by our technology, we're getting in these modes where we're constantly in chronos time. And when a lot of innovation and weird thinking happens in like the childlike play of Kairos time, and we lose a lot of that, we reduce our ability as humans to just be innovative. And now we're like, well, let's just shift the innovation into AI, and AI will do the innovations for us. And I'm always annoyed by this because you don't expect a dog to be a human. A dog's a companion side by side. And yet we think that an AI should be like a human. All of the technology and tools that have worked side by side that we've domesticated have been domesticated for their strengths. Horses and oxen and dogs and even humans. But they have not been expected to act like us. They've been allies. So if we think of technology as a non-human ally that lives alongside us, that's a tool, we can begin to go back to the original idea of technology, which is sometimes a tool, sometimes kind of in a cybernetic feedback loop of things. So in the other session, I asked everybody to hold up their phones. Can you hold up your phones really quick? It looks cool. So the quicker you held up those tools, the more you're cyborgs. And you don't need to be Terminator or Robocop to be a cyborg. You just need to be in an interactive relationship with a piece of technology or a tool. The word cyborg came from a 1960 paper on space travel, in which a human adds something to their bodies to adapt to a new space. So somebody in a spacesuit is a cyborg. Using a tool as an extension of your fist, like a hammer, makes you a cyborg. Using a knife as an extension of your teeth makes you a cyborg. Science fiction gave us this idea that technology should be like in your face and intense. And that came from Rossum's Robots, which was a stage play on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution that had to have, instead of man versus nature, man versus machine. And in a stage play, you need to have actors. So then you had a robot that looks like a human. And this became this whole aesthetic trend that took us away from the actual idea of making useful technology as tools and made us want to, for years and years and years, make technology that's shaped like a human. So now that we have the aesthetics of either military or Ludditism, we don't have any middle future. And a middle future is as boring and as successful as a washing machine. The killer app for the home. That's an app. Electricity was the big deal, and all the apps that could run on electricity was amazing. And then we had Bell Labs, and we had all these monopolies like Xerox PARC, and they hired not just technologists, but anthropologists, and historians, and artists. And the story I like to tell that's not entirely accurate, but it's a good story, is that Lucy Suchman, who's an anthropologist, found that at Xerox PARC, all of these printers were really annoying and sitting in the corner. because the engineers that built them loved the buttons. And they made so many buttons on them that the average person said, I don't know what to do. So they had to they had to specially train all these women because they could figure it out, put them on the machines, and then they would be the people that would work on it. So Lucy came in and said, look, most people want to go up to a machine, press a copy button, and be done. They don't want to be computing as their primary task. And in a just democratic society, you should be able to choose the amount of computing you want to do. You can either go big in time to it, or you can go and live on a cork farm and make cork for wine bottles. Awesome, John. So she said, let's just make a big green button, and I'll do most of the work. And that revolutionized printing, right? Because you could throw 10,000 technologists at it, and they would keep solving the problem the same way. And now that we've divorced art from science, we can't make any of these big leap forwards that we were able to in the past with all these innovation places, because we think of tech as its own thing, and we miss out on applying it to culture and making stuff at human level. And the only way that it works is in some of the industries where it makes a lot more sense, like fighter pilots. Fighter pilots had these engineers that would design like little things that you had to pull out when you were in a barrel roll, but you had to like duck under the cockpit to do it. People were like just passing out and then crashing. And finally, a bunch of them were like, hey, you engineers, would you put the thing above the dashboard? And like, oh, well, you have to rewire the thing here, and it takes more wire, and it sucks. And they're like, no, we're dying out here. Would you please do this? And then that was the beginning. This pilot just told me this like last week on a plane. He was like, that was the beginning of user experience in planes. And I was like, cool, this is great. So we have this era of interruptive technology. It's not just my PowerPoint failing with the projector and the HDMI cable, but it's also the battery life. It's also the network connection. We are building technology as if it's for the desktop, where we have all of our attention, all the battery life, all the connectivity. Yet we don't have that. We have the equivalent of dial-up on our cell networks because we refuse to expand the bandwidth, or we refuse to make apps that are so small that they're fast. We need to have like a different version of every website, which is a really low bandwidth version. And that needs to be just as good. So when you load your stupid restaurant page, it just gives you the address and the phone number. We need a calm technology, and this is not my word. This came from Xerox PARC in the mid-90s. Mark Weiser, who is no longer with us, and John Seeley Brown created a future before it happened. They created a future in which you would walk in with like an active badge, the one I'm wearing around my neck. This is funny how this comes in. And then it would boot up your computer inside, and then there was just all of this technology that they just built really, really, really far ahead of time. And then they realized that the scarcest resource in the 21st century would not be technology, it would be our attention. And how technology broke our attention would make or break that technology. And that it would become cheap. Because at that point, it was very, very expensive. There's a few papers on calmtech.com that I encourage you to read. Anybody from any background in any era will be able to read these papers the exact same way. We think about technology as moving so fast, we can't catch up with it. But let's think about human universals like we would think about Greeks and tragedies and plays. There are also technology universals that never change. And once we get to those, we don't have to panic about what technology decisions, and somewhat easier to build them, although it's still really difficult. This coming age of calm technology talks about technology. There were many people to one mainframe computer. We had one person to one desktop or a family to a desktop, but everything was rooted into place. You wouldn't connect to the web because there wasn't a web. Then suddenly we had multiple devices sharing each of us, and now we're going to have so many devices sharing each of us the place on this kind of simultaneous time. And I really like this quote that keeps getting wrong. Like, people keep interpreting this wrong in the advertising industry. No. The whole point of this quote is that a good tool is invisible, not because it's invisible and you can't see it and it's processing everything in the background for you and it's full of AI and blockchain, but by invisible, you focus on the task and not the tool. You open a book, and when it's well written, you dissolve into it. You and the book don't exist anymore. You're in some weird virtual reality simulation of your own making, plus the tool. The original Star Wars was nice because there was mystery involved in it, and so you left the movie theater thinking more because things were unexplained. Lego blocks are the least amount of technology to get you to come up with all the rest of it. And now we build all this tech that tries to do everything for you, and we make people feel dumb. We've removed culture. When I was a kid, around age 10, my mom was in a really high-paying job in a blue-collar tech position as master control operator at a television station. This would require you, in the 80s, splicing in all of the TV reels in real time and putting them into the TV, and then throwing it up in Betamax and all this stuff. It was a great position, and it got automated. She left, hung out with me for a while, tried to go back to work, and robots had taken over her job. And she was watching a bot do her job, which was full of culture and action and like fixing stuff behind the scenes and like being really active, sitting behind a computer in a windowless room, watching a bunch of screens, and if one went out, she would press a button and somebody who was watching her watch the screens would come in and fix it. When we talk about automation, we forget that people are demoralized when we automate too much. They don't know how it works in second-generation automation. They can't really fix stuff at human scale. I like the example of the cake mix. When this cake mix came out, the instant cake mix, it said just add water, and no one bought it because it was too easy. Then they made an instant cake mix and say add eggs, milk, and water, and everyone's like, wow, it's so easy. I love making this cake mix. I don't have to do anything. So this idea of these invisible tools is not that you make so much stuff that's smarter. Mark Weiser said we need smarter humans, not smarter devices. How do we make things that give us information so that we can make better decisions? But fundamentally, we need to make those decisions. Otherwise, we get into really bad war games type situations, and we don't have those movies around anymore to teach the next generation. So we gotta remember that. So how do we actually design this technology? This is one of the quotes from Mark Weiser, that technology shouldn't require all of our attention, just some of it, and only when necessary. The question is, what is some of it, and what's when necessary? And that's a hard thing to answer. It's easy to answer with a tea kettle because you set it, forget it, and it calls to you when it's done. But when you change the context and you put the tea kettle into a nice tea shop, you can't just have this tea kettle going off all the time. So you make a new tea kettle that just has a light that turns on when it's done. And then the barista who's watching can figure it out. Or a different chime, or you set the notification style. But the main thing is that if you built the tea kettle today, you would Bluetooth into it, it would give you a countdown with an ad to re-up the tea bags on Amazon, and then you would finally get like an alarm that would share to social media that you had made tea. We have all this focus in front of us. It's very, very high resolution. That's what we used to drive with. And a car is a great piece of calm tech because it focuses you on the road. It gets you into kind of system 2 processing where you don't even notice if you like driving. I like driving. You get real calm down. It works with glancing back and forth through the rear view mirror. It has a foot pedal, which we forgot suddenly from the Industrial Revolution. And you can push that without having to look at it. You can change gears. You can press the physical, hopefully, radio buttons. And if it's a BMW, it's orange inside, so at night it doesn't interfere with your night vision. All the rest are like really bright blue, and now the Teslas have this like big interface that distracts you from the road. But the original car was to make use of your primary attention, allow you to glance and get the information you needed to do so that you could get somewhere. And that was really nice. Also, the very first mouse in the 1960s had a foot pedal, so you could scroll down the page with your foot. No more repetitive stress injury. Here's a silly example. This is the LumaVac Smart Posture Sensor. It buzzes when you have bad posture. It's like a little brother.
I need that.
But I don't really like this. It's an example. But the more serious example is that I used to have an employee that was really excited about getting an insulin pump. And when he got one, it beeped. And it sounded like a phone. and it was really high-pitched. So when he was in weddings or funerals, it sounded like he was being really rude in movie theaters. But then when he was at a loud show, he couldn't hear it and it became life-threatening. He called the manufacturer and said, can I turn off the sound? Can I change it into a buzz? Because if any of you use Microsoft Outlook or people in your office leave the sound on, that's for them, not you. Why are they leaving the sound on? Why do they need all these things? But if you had a buzz or like a light or anything else, a different notification style, it would be more personal. And an insulin pump is very personal, so it needs a personal notification style. I went around and talked to different people that had this. This Swedish family had an 8-year-old with an insulin pump, and the kids' ears were getting hurt by the noise. So they took apart the insulin pump, voided the warranty, took out the speaker, and then set an alarm clock with a buzzer so that the kid would get a buzz to refill his insulin pump. And the insulin pump manufacturer was like, well, we made this for assisted living pumps so that the caretaker will understand when to refill insulin. They could never even understand that somebody would use this on their own, or that somebody would use it in a different context other than the user experience principal persona cards that they had manufactured without discussing anything about anybody in the industry. So when in doubt, just allow people to change the notification style and it will all be okay. And the same thing is happening to the really loud washing machines and dryers that go bzzz, except people are moving from these gargantuan suburban houses with a basement that needs to have the big buzz carry through the floorboards to a tiny square foot apartment, and you need to be able to turn that off. And a lot of people can't. So how do we make technology that informs in a calm way? My old co-founder and I built this silly light. You often have these Microsoft technology ads where there's this perfect San Francisco guy who wakes up in the perfect San Francisco condo that has absolutely no road sound in it, and then speaks to Siri, and for the very first time he speaks to Siri, he's understood perfectly because he has a perfect San Francisco accent. And somehow Siri always knows what's going on in his life perfectly and tells him in an incredibly loud voice. You know, so if he has somebody staying over, they'll like reveal all his personal information in the morning. So instead, we just made a light bulb connected to Wi-Fi, and it's just connected to a weather report. You wouldn't have to connect it to Wi-Fi if you just grabbed Wi-Fi to your personal server at your house, stored it, and then changed the color of the light bulb to be what the weather would be. So this was sunny this particular morning because I live in Portland, and it's mostly a blue light because it'll tell me it's going to rain. Sometimes it's a white light because it's going to be foggy. But this particular morning, it was yellow. And I knew, after stumbling into my kitchen kind of blurry-eyed, that it's going to be a sunny day. So this is kind of like an ambient awareness. It's not throwing information at you in audio, which is really invasive. It's not giving you information in text. It's not giving you the most amount. It's giving you an indicator. And then you can choose to look at the iPad on the wall if you want additional information. And this is important because it uses different levels of information. It's not using your primary focus, it's using your tertiary focus. You can move it into secondary and primary, but you're the one making the decision, moving it from these information awareness zones. I think I need some water, by the way.
I can get that.
Joe's got it.
Do I have? Oh, I have
Joe's getting it.
somewhere.
Joe's getting it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Don.
So earlier I got really mad that we were trying to make AI that acted like humans when we don't expect our dogs to act like humans. And so what is good about tech and what is good about humans? We are really, really skilled at curation, hopefully at best empathy, also destruction, but empathy if we're treated well. We're good at innovation and creativity and weirdness and silliness and a sense of humor, and understanding whether something's a sense of humor or not, although social networks might throw that away for the last 5 years, but a machine is really good at going through tons and tons of data and understanding something. And so if you pair them together, you get something that's really powerful. Gary Kasparov, the chess champion, calls it centaurs, that a mediocre chess player with a pretty good system will outperform even an expert AI or an expert chess player. Because it's about the human-machine symbiosis being more than 1 + 1 = 3, just being so much more. So I'll give you an example for So there was people really obsessed with quantitative analysis, and they ran a pet treat company. And they went into the store and they said, this store is no longer selling the pet treats, so the sales are down, we're just gonna remove it from the shelves. And then all these patrons came in and said, why did you take the pet treats away? We were buying them. They said, no, you weren't. And so an anthropologist went into the store and said, the pet treats are on the top shelf. And the people that are buying them are kids and grandparents, and they can't reach them. And so that's what's happening, not just because you have this idea of the data telling you something. And so if we just do one or the other, we miss out. We can't tell the macro trends if we don't use the tech. We can't tell the micro trends and influence the macro trends if we don't use the human level. But right now we're so focused on one thing that we're going to miss out on everything. When Google first came out, people scrolled down the page. They were trying to figure out what was on the page. They were used to the links being made for them. You have to contribute to Google to use it. You have to say what you want. And it has all of these robots behind the scenes giving you a choice. You're the one making the decision. The I'm feeling lucky was removed because it was mostly wrong. But it is narrowing down millions of search results into 10 that you can make a good, informed choice from. And you'll probably go back a couple times, but you're the one in control. This is my friend Todd Huffman, and he was really mad about seeing all these grad students throwing away their research careers by just preparing slides of tissues in 2 dimensions for a year and a half. They were losing their eyesight, they were having repetitive stress injuries. It was incredibly slow, super boring, and they weren't working on cancer research. So he said, I'm going to make a bot out of a supercomputer, which was just a gaming machine at the time. It's going to scan it, cut it with a diamond knife, scan it in 3D while it does it, upload it to a system, and then the doctors will be able to tell when it became cancerous, inform the system, what kind of cancer, how long it took, and that feedback loop will be more powerful than training an AI from scratch or training doctors. And then the system won't say, this will become melanoma. It will say, it has a 50% chance of this in 6 months, this, and this type. And then they can say, I can narrow down my research so that I'm not going from all the cancers to slightly less research. So it's not doing all the work, but it's doing a good part to free up people's time. So eventually this gets better. Plus, it's 1,500 times faster than a human can do it. So all those people can just work for his company and do cool stuff, which is what he's doing. Technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. This is a cool art project. It's called Dangling Wire. So Natalie Dermanjenko was an artist hired at Xerox PARC in the 80s, and she worked with Mark Weiser on this in 1995. She was awesome because she said, look, let's just take the server in the facility and attach a piece of spaghetti string plastic to it. And so whenever something interesting is going on the network, it will whir around. That's it. The whole art project. But the effect of this was that when you heard this piece of spaghetti string plastic whirring around, you're like, something cool is happening. I don't know what it is. And you would just join forces with whoever popped out of their office, and you would go on the hunt to see what was going on at Xerox PARC. It's not having a birthday and forcing people to eat cake and celebrate something every 2 days because there's so many people in your company that there's 1 billion birthdays. It's actually people going on a discovery mode, they're 5 years old, trying to figure out what's going on. So much social network happened, not because we were told, not because they were told what was going on, but because they had to discover it together across different departments. So this is why you hire artists, by the way. This is awesome. This is the least amount of time to get the job done. Okay, these Roombas are cute because when they're done, they go dun 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 dun, and when they're stuck, they go dun dun. And the whole point of these Roombas is why we like why we don't like C3PO, and why we like R2D2. C3PO might be fluent in 2 million languages, but he's annoying in every single one of those languages. And R2D2 knows one language of beeps and boops and is really cute. And we know when he's stressed out, and we're like, oh, he's so cute, he's R2. Yeah. But mainly, you don't have to translate R2 into any language. It's universal. The preloaders for those Pixar films don't have any language because they use human universals. The Roomba, before they started making it speak, which I'm pissed off about, but before they started, it would just have these nice beeps. And they would tell you what was going on. They had a light back up, and that was it. So when they needed to internationalize this, they didn't have to translate poorly into another language. When we have devices speak to us in human language, we expect to be able to speak back to them in the same way that they speak to us. And it's a fallacy because they do not understand this. But if there's a kind of sub-level medium language that's some beeps and boops, then we know exactly how sophisticated they are. And we don't make a mistake thinking that there's more there. So 15 years ago when the smartphone came out, or when the camera got attached to the phone, do you remember all the articles? Oh no, things are horrible, our privacy is dead, we can't allow these in dressing rooms. And now we know that people just use it to take pictures of their food before they eat it and pre-digest everything. But it's not that tech isn't ready for us, it's usually that we're not ready for technology. When the first elevators came out, we had to artificially slow them down because people were terrified that they would, well, first off, their eardrums hurt, but they were also terrified because they'd never been accelerated that way. If you go back in time to the earliest trains, there are people terrified about being squished because they'd never been accelerated that way before either. It wasn't until in New York, the elevator operators union went on strike that we humans realized we could press the buttons ourselves. So what's normal is invisible. All of you have a camcorder in your pocket, and it doesn't matter, I'm not terrified. But it would be terrifying, I guess, in the past, but because we all pretty much have it, it's okay. It's normalized, it's invisible. Anything that restores you to the current norm is accepted, even decorative. So glasses are accepted, decorative, they restore you to the idea of 2020. But anything that goes above that is fear-inducing, like the Google Glass. Why was the Google Glass such a failure? There's lots of different reasons, but first is that it takes a long time to digest technology. Each new feature could take 1 or 2 years to dissolve into the fabric of social reality, norms, cultural methods. And when we assume that people can just digest an entire cow at once instead of a nice meal with like 15 courses over 4 years, or 4 hours, then we mess up. So the Google Glass released 15 features at a $1,500 price point, plus you could only be a developer to develop on it, and it was proprietary. Everything was wrong, and journalists reported on the serious thing, which was persistent video recording. Not to mention that you got maybe 15 minutes of battery life before it burned your head. But it was fear-inducing because not everybody had it. All those exoskeletons in the military are really terrifying. It's associated with this RoboCop type aesthetics that we have for movies. And so if you take it over a really long-term span, like the iPod, first let's get people to carry this on them. Then let's put a touchscreen on it. Then let's put apps on it. Then let's make it into a phone. Then let's put GPS in it. Then let's put AirPods on it. Then, how many years, like 15 at least, that took? And so people didn't notice, but now everybody has them in their pockets, and it's not terrifying. It's annoying, but it's not terrifying. The right amount of tech is the minimum to solve the problem. And I think the problem with this is that we love in startups to be like, let's just add more stuff. Let's make the next Facebook, so let's just have all the features of Facebook. And you can't make the next Facebook. Everything is its own unique thing. And if you're a good designer, you take away things until there's nothing left to take away. And you make the simplest version. So we have streetlights, which are punctuation for your reality. You stop, you go, it's universal. Almost everywhere in the world has a streetlight, and it's understood. Regardless of what side of the road you drive on, it's a streetlight. You don't have to read it. If it was an audio, you would have to take a long time to process it. If it was a sign you had to read, you would have to process it. But this indicator light works with a very low-level processing in your brain. So it's so quick to understand that it can go into the kind of background processing. So we don't have to think every time we look at a light. Can you imagine that? That would be awful. Then you have the Bauhaus movement creating iconography that is so basic and simple, even if it's not entirely accurate anymore, that is so useful that everywhere in the world can use it, so that every airport we go to, and almost every city we can go to, we know what the toilets are. Could you imagine if it was like iPhone, Android, and like Windows and all this stuff, and each one had its own like emoji, but it was slightly off, and you didn't know which one was which? It's like going to those bathrooms where they like think they're really cute by putting like hats on some people and not others, and you don't know which one to go into. Not that it should matter anyway, but technology should make use of the near and the far. Early on, we had a lot of people sneaking out of their houses trying to use mainframes. Like Bill Gates in 1973, and then you had the mainframe coming to your home in the form of a desktop, and now we have people storing all of our data on a kind of remote mainframe again, or the cloud. What happened? We need to store what's useful to us with us, and then process stuff in the cloud if we need to, but it really should be taking the least amount of technology and information and processing. So right now, every company has to both store our data and keep it safe from hackers. But everything's already been hacked, so it's already done anyway. So don't worry about it. All of the data is in the cloud. But it's really important that companies don't have to do both of these things. And if you had your own personal server or data file that you brought with you, shared with your doctor for 20 minutes, and they would write their new data file to your file, and you would take it home with you, then if somebody hacked into their system, they might get what was being shared in the last 20 minutes, not a giant data lake of every single thing you've done. But because we're locked into these ideas of what the norm is, like the mouse took like 40 years to get rid of so that we could have these touch screens, that we think that this is the only way that tech works, and we forget about all the alternatives because we're really locked into it. There's a concept called cosmotechnics, and the idea is that what would happen if different countries made their own software? Like, what would that look like? What would Indian software look like? Not us remotely colonizing them by having them build what looks like a Silicon Valley clone. But what would it actually look like if the cultures and traditions and long-term history made it into the software? How come we only have like 1 or 2 softwares in the whole world? That's a weird question. I asked that to like the largest outsourcing company in India, and that was difficult. Who of you had like a TV repair person down your street, or like an appliance repair person?
Yeah.
And you knew them, and they were like known by your family for a long time? In Portland, there's Stark's Vacuum Museum, and you can get your vacuum repaired, and I get my vacuum repaired there. It's awesome. There's the same people every time. They have a vacuum history museum. You should definitely check it out. But mostly, the joy of this tech is that it's made so that you can maintain it down the street. Like, if you had like a forum site on the web, and somebody was mean to each other, and you ran it, you'd have such a small community that you could block somebody. But if you have Facebook that's run by one identity, then when you send that report off and you need to have some mental health crisis happen, you just get put into a queue. And the question is, does empathy really scale when you have one-size-fits-all technology that only one person or entity can run at the same time? Okay, so this is the end. If good design allows you to accomplish your goals in the least amount of moves, which is harder to design up front but better to use later, then calm technology allows you to do the same thing with the least amount of mental cost. And that's removing all the unnecessary tech so that your supply chain is easier, maintenance is easier, you can maintain anywhere. Some of the Xerox printers that I got trained on, when they break, they teach you how to fix them. And I worked in the printing thing at my college in the basement. And I used to run around campus during finals, and all of the equipment inside the computer was color-coded in like purple or green, like nice colors. And then it would have this little panel, and it would be like, it's broken. It would have a light that would turn on, and you open that panel, and then it would light up the different components you needed to fix, and you could fix it in less than 30 seconds. And man, it felt so empowering to be able to fix these things and have you know how to fix it just by somebody teaching you. But it was because the design was so good that anybody could maintain it and anybody could learn. And then just the glee of everybody's faces during finals having their printer work was definitely the reward for me. So if a person's primary task should not be computing unless they choose it, but being human, then we have to consider that the scarcest resource is not technology, it's our attention. And we have to work on making technology or working alongside it in a way that regards it as a tool and gets our lives back so we can be creative and interesting people instead of kind of weirdos like we are right now. It's like hoarding cats and newspapers in our phones and thinking that's okay. I got upset because Mark Weiser died, so I wrote a book on this. And then I got really upset about the beeps, and so I wrote a book on sound so you can make better beeps. I took all this research, which is slowly dying out on the web, and I just took it all because it's public property from PARC, and I put it on the website so you can like download it and read it. All of it's delicious. It's like so satisfying to read. It's short, it's brief, it will calm you down about tech. It's beautiful and made at a time in which people could think not just tech, but anthropology, history, and art. So that's at calmtech.com. Thanks.
We have just a few minutes, and we make great use of time. And so we're going to take a few minutes of questions. If anyone has questions for Amber, we've got a couple microphones that we can spread out here.
You can also leave too.
We have an ice cream social, so you don't want to leave late.
Oh yeah, wait a few minutes. You can ask any question you want. I did like speech and debate competitively, so I like the Q&A part.
Hi, so the future seems like, yes, personal servers is going to be what's coming down the pipeline. How do you see blockchain specifically playing into that? Because you mentioned, like, okay, you know, if somebody hacks me, they're only going to get my 20 minutes. They're not going to get my full chain, right? They're only going to get that little block.
Yeah, I have an unpopular opinion on blockchain. Apparently the AV does not like that I have an unpopular opinion because it runs on blockchain. I really like Doug Rushkoff's idea of blockchain that, like, if people can't trust each other, they must micromanage every single transaction, like whether in your HOA you watered the lawn or not, and if you didn't, then you are doomed by the intense community and the social pressure. That, like, it just becomes the most puritanical utopia of libertarianism, which is a contradiction. And that everybody is under like constant surveillance and watching, and everything is recorded. The blockchain I like is the rings on a tree that tell you how old it is, and so that you can tell whether it was like a rainy or snowy season. Right now, for me, blockchain seems like a distraction, and there's a lot more stuff that we should worry about, like how long we're going to survive as a species, whether or not we should be having self-driving cars, because we already have those and they're called trains. Whether we have enough resources to put everything on a blockchain, whether we have enough cobalt in the world to have enough chips that everything can be recorded on, whether or not we can do it naturally, whether we can make a edible mushroom-based packaging material so that Amazon can continue to ship us cool stuff, whether we can make objects that, like, why are the most temporary objects made out of stuff that lasts permanently, and vice versa? Like, there's a lot more stuff that I would worry about. I tend to be very late on things. Like, I like to have a bunch of 10-year technology cycles before I make an opinion on something. So, you know, we see AI as like a 10-year cycle again and again. My grandpa worked on it in the 60s. My dad worked on it in the 80s with concatenated speech and voice recognition for telecom. And every single 10-year cycle, the beginning is, oh, it's going to solve everything and it's going to be great. And then all the inflated expectations get taken up by marketers who have no idea what they're talking about because they're marketers and they're paid to be excited, and then they leave, and then everybody gets fired, and then we start again. Same with VR, AR, and as long as we keep ignoring the humanities part, we're just going to keep going in those cycles again and again because there's no history. Because I haven't really seen a cycle in blockchain, but I have seen a hype cycle in which everything is purported to solve all of the problems, I naturally don't trust it. I'd love to think about it as it solves the world, that humans solve the world. And even though it's really shiny, I deliberately don't trust the shiny, mostly because just because something is new doesn't mean it's better. The old, we know what's wrong. The new, we don't know what's wrong yet. So I'd like to wait around to see what happens before we throw everything on the blockchain. There's never going to be a world in which everything is all a credit card and everything's digital or everything's analog. We're always going to have mix. The question is which areas will be colonized by which tech, and will they be fun or not? Because a lot of utopianism, once you get there, is not very enjoyable. And I prefer to have a world in which we have a lot of options, whether to use tech or not, or to be monitored or not, or a society that trusts people and governs itself enough that they don't need to monitor everything. Because in Taoism, that's a sign of a weak ruler. If you have to monitor everything, you can use pride and ethics and all sorts of wonderful other squishy terms to have the same effect. That's my unpopular opinion on blockchain. I hope that's okay. Do you want a question?
I have a question for you.
Do you want short answers or long answers?
Okay, so actually, it's a two-part question. First one's
Can you hold it
easier.
up like this? Yeah.
All right. First question I have is an easy one. Is that better?
Somewhat.
I'm going to ask, do you have more experience in the private or public sectors?
How would you mean public sector?
Government, state, federal, any entities like that working directly with them, or have you only worked for?
I have literally 50 mix on everything.
Okay.
So government, publicly traded, privately traded company, art, music,
Okay. So the second part of my question would be, with the deconstruction of net neutrality, do you feel like the government, the federal public side should be doing more of this effort towards the trends in technology, or do you feel like the private sector should be driving more of it?
That's a great question. We're going through a period of time that was akin to Queen Elizabeth's time in the 1600s, which was the merchant class began making more money than the crown. And this is where sumptuary law came from. So the merchants were able to buy more expensive clothes than the crown. And so the crown had to look like Queen Amidala the whole time, all these cool new outfits to show that they had more money than the merchant class. And sumptuary law was if you wore too much taffeta or shiny stuff, we would tax you. Or if the queen was really mad that you made more money than her, because it would usurp her power as a crown, she would have a big dinner party at your house with one big nose, which means you got to repaint all the walls, invite all her friends over, and spend 75% of your money, rendering you below the crown. So right now in government, we have a thing going on where the private companies are getting more money, more power than government, and they're spending so much money on lobbying. I don't know exactly where this will go, but the privatized sector is annoying to me in a few ways. First, it seems more efficient to begin with. But once it takes over, they raise all the prices, and it becomes a divergent society in which you pay clear to go through security easily. But if you're panicking because you have no money and you couldn't afford this or that, and you have to go through, it just doesn't give you the same rights, and the middle class completely erodes. So, is it the responsibility of the government to do more government stuff? Heck yeah, but they can't. Is it the responsibility of private companies to not have this special web that you can pay more for, and some apps get more bandwidth and others don't? Yeah, but it's not going to make money for that. So what I think could happen, here's my I don't know. What could happen is we get a web in which some companies have higher traffic than others. Then there's a recession. Then there's inflation. Then you have all these weirdos making really low level, really cool software like Craigslist that could run on any browser, on any computer for all time, because it's functional and not decorative. And there becomes this super fast, high-speed, awesome web, because it's just basics. And then the private companies that haven't optimized have to use all of that new lower bandwidth technology because bandwidth becomes too expensive. And so then we get some sort of leveling off. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it's going to go. I mean, we're like off the grid of history at this point. So it's a good question, but we're really stuck. I mean, the amount that Amazon spends for lobbyists is crazy. I mean, if we want to hit our climate change goals, we just don't have to use high fructose corn syrup and corn and all our stuff. It's like 37% reduction. You know, but we don't talk about that. We say, let's save water. So if we trace it all back, there's all sorts of stuff that people could do, but they already bought all the farm equipment and all that stuff, and so we have to let that run off for the next 15 years until those loans get repaid, and then we can start switching. So it's just going to take a long time for a lot of these systems to go forward. Meanwhile, all of the postal service will be rented by Amazon. Whee! Sorry, it's a snarky answer. One last question.
Quick question. You used to live in Oregon, you live in San Francisco, right?
No, I lived in Portland for the last 13 years.
And Massachusetts. Can you quickly compare what the life of people technologically?
Yeah.
And starting from there, finishing with, what's your feeling about social points? What I'm referring to, HBO, I think it's Black Mirror, when everybody rated, and then your life is changed depending on your rating.
Yeah. Okay, so Netflix is Black Mirror with your rating, and you can only do stuff if you have a good rating. It's already happening in China with the social score. Science fiction is often either a political thing so that you don't get, like The Wizard of Oz is all about politics, but you couldn't write about politics overtly, so you write like this fictional thing. So a lot of science fiction is about what's actually going on. So most of it's all completely true. So that's what's going on. I mean, I have more followers, so I get more opportunities. That's not how it should be. It should be based on, like, if I cook a really great meal, you know, that would be great. But, so that's that. And then the other question is, like, how are things different in, like, Oregon versus San Francisco and Boston? Okay, so I stayed in Portland, Oregon, because if you recall, Robert Moses, the guy who made all these highway projects and tore down all these ethnic neighborhoods in New York, starting in the 30s, and made the killer app for the car, which was a highway that went to a beach that you could only get to by car, so everybody would, like, get a car to go to be seen at the beach. He tried to tear down a ton of neighborhoods in Portland, Oregon. And Jane Jacobs, who was all about the life and death of great American cities, totally opposed him, teamed up with Tom McCall, which we now have Tom McCall Waterfront Park, and pushed all of that out. So out of 1,000 highway projects that were completed in the United States by Robert Moses, only 12 of them were not completed, I think, and maybe 9 of them were in Portland, Oregon. You can still see the remnants because in North Portland there's things like Unthanked Park and like whole bunches of blocks of park blocks. The houses got demolished, but the highways were not built. Instead, all of that got put into light rail funding. That's why I live in Portland, Oregon, because it's a city at human scale that, unlike most other cities, they got a lot of non-places from all the different highways coming in, stretching out stuff for the suburbs, making whole sections unlivable and loud and noisy and useless. When the big box stores came in the 90s and tried to colonize all of the non-places created by the highways, they didn't find enough non-places to colonize, and so Portland got left in the 90s. So you have a bunch of small businesses, burgeoning food and craft industry, where people are remembering stuff, making them at human scale, and it's tasty food, and great little tiny companies. And so I lived there because unlike being 1 in a million in San Francisco, where everybody thinks the same thing oftentimes because that's what you get paid to do, and they're all frenetic, or in Boston, which is really interesting, but it's different. You know, I feel like I can be a weirdo in Portland, get paid a San Francisco salary, put it into art, and have a good time.